Hello, sewing friends. Have you ever wondered how to take quilt block panels like this adorable owl printed panel and turn them into embellished blocks for wall hangings or to incorporate into your quilts? If you have, stay tuned because today I'm going to show you how. Hi, I'm Joanne Banko from letsgosew.com. My friend Beth Sweet from Sweet Time Quilting in Sebastian, Florida, sent me this wonderful pre-printed panel, and I wanted to do something special with it. So I turned it into a little mini wall hanging. The wall hanging has a lot of different techniques on it. Trapunto, added borders using embroidery designs, quilting with a walking foot or a digital dual feed foot, and a few other extras that I'm going to tell you about. So we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I did the center block and created stipple quilting accents for my pre-printed motif here, all in my design center on the Brother Luminaire. All right, I'm over here at the machine and I am using the Brother Luminaire to show you these first techniques. And I want to do that by taking advantage of some features that we have in My Design Center. My Design Center is found on multiple different models of Brother machines and allows you to do some on-screen digitizing. So I'm using a mouse today, so you see my cursor here in place of my finger or in place of the stylus that comes with the machine. It's going to give me a little bit more accuracy and makes it a little bit more simple to demonstrate this. So I'm going to click on My Design Center, and the first thing I want to do is scan the fabric that I've already hooped. I'll show you that in fabric in just a minute, but I'm going to do that by clicking on this leaf, and then I'm going to touch Image Scan. And when I touch Image Scan and then touch Scan, the machine is going to literally scan the fabric that I have in the hoop and take a picture using the camera-like function of that image. So I'm going to click Scan, and then we will see the hoop scanned in the machine. So let me click Scan. Click OK. All right, now you can see the fabric being scanned in the hoop. And while it's going through that process, I just want to point out a couple things. If you notice, I've used just a very subtle fabric as a border. I cut out that panel and then pieced two pieces around it for a border in order to make a larger block for my wall hanging. And I also did one more thing. I took my blue wash away marker and I defined the edges right around that panel because there's actually a seam here on all four of those edges where I joined those borders, and I'm going to need to have a little bit more definition in these areas when I show you the design process on My Design Center. Next thing I'm going to do is switch back over to the screen. All right, I'm back at the screen, and if you look, you can see the image has been scanned into the machine. I'm going to show you just a couple things here. If I touch the leaf to the right here, it will actually make that a little bit darker, a little bit more prominent. So if I need to see the details in that design, I can use these controls here, make that darker or make that lighter by going on the opposite end. And I will actually need to have that lighter when I'm drawing shapes on top of this image because I want to be able to see it more clearly. I'm going to go ahead and use the zoom feature and zoom in 200%, and then use my hand tool, which allows me to just pan that into position. And I want to do that so that I can see those lines a little bit better and see the entire area that I've scanned in. Again, I'll just click on this so you could see where that helps you to see a little bit more definition there. All right, I'm going to start by choosing the Shapes tool, and the Shapes tool is right here. I want to create a shape with just an outline. I can do an outline, I can do a fill, or I can do a fill stitch and an outline, but for this step here I just want an outline, and I'm going to start by making that little area that I had in the center of my owl. I want to create that little belly area there. So I'm going to touch size, and I'm going to shrink that down. And as I'm doing this, you'll see that I really have a lot of different options. I've got the ability to resize both proportionately, smaller or larger, and then I can also stretch out this design either way using different controls. So I'm going to move that down, and I'm going to resize that down some more. And again, I will be showing you how I used this particular shape in the center, in the belly area, and also where the eyes are to create a trapunto effect. All right, let's just move that down just a little bit. And we'll just bump that size up just a little bit more. Okay, now I want to add in the definition for my eyes. So I'm going to go back to shape again. This time I'm going to choose a circle. And I'm going to resize my circle. And I want to fill just that outer area around the eye with a straight stitch. I'm actually going to be assigning stitches to all of these shapes in a few minutes here. But I like to create my shapes first and then go back and change my stitches. Now again, I'm going to go ahead and go up into this magnification tool and increase that and turn the hand on so I can pan that over so that you can see that I can view this in very, very high detail. And if I need to again resize that a little bit, I can go up and do that. I want to keep my outline within the colored area of the eye pattern on this. So next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and fill the other eye with this outline. So how do I do that? Well, I have a couple options. I could go ahead and select another circle and redraw there, or I can simply select my copy paste tool and move that over, get that into position there, turn off the hand, and move that right over on top of the other eye. All right, that looks pretty good. Now what do I do if I want to get back in here and nudge this one or this one and move that around a little bit? Well, I can go into my selection key here. I can select this little magic wand, and whichever piece I click on, then I get a red box around it showing me that that's what's selected, and then I can go ahead and do whatever modifications I want to do to that. All right, so let's go ahead and minimize that just a little bit so you can see a little bit more here. And I want to go in and I want to now create a similar floral shape around this flower. Now you may already be thinking, why didn't I just draw these shapes? Well, we do have drawing tools here, so let me show you that in really quick here. I'm going to click on this little pencil, and if I clicked on my options here, I can draw a variety of lines. I can have freeform lines, I can have the lines connect, I can draw straight lines, or I can draw connected straight lines. I'm just going to use the freeform tool. We'll leave it on black for now. And I'll show you that I could actually trace around this area. Maybe I want to define that forehead area. Okay, now doesn't look so good, does it? And that's because it really does take practice. And you can do this, like I said, either with a mouse, you can do it with a stylus. You'll even find alternative third-party styluses that people are using to do this. But I'll just give you a couple tips because it really does get easier as you do it. First of all, the best tip I have for you is make use of the undo button. And when you use that, it just clears out whatever the last action you took and allows you to start over again. So let me start over again. Just go ahead and draw that in, and maybe I'm a little bit better this time. So I can keep drawing until I get exactly what I want. Now, if you are using a mouse, you'll find that doing this drawing all in one motion makes it a lot easier. So I recommend going a little bit slow, but maintaining your movement until you get to the end. You also want to make sure if you're going to fill that area that it is completely closed. So that's another whole issue, but if I had any areas that were broken when I went to fill that, it would spill out into the outer area. So that's an important point to remember. But for today, I'm just going to be using shapes. And I really recommend that you use shapes as much as possible because they're so clean and neat and even and easy to use. So I'm going to go now back to my shapes, and I'm going to select this little flower. Again, I'm just doing an outline. I'm going to shrink that down. And you're going to see that I'm going to be able to pretty closely mimic the shape in the flower that is already there on that pre-printed panel. So I'm going to go ahead and magnify that and drag this around a little bit. And then turn off that hand so that I can get my selected piece right into position. Now, if I go into my rotation key, I can rotate that until it more closely matches the shape of that flower. And then, of course, I can go back to resize. I can make this a little bit taller, stretch it out a little bit. That looks pretty good. Let's just make that just a little bit larger. Oops, I meant smaller. Then make it a little bit larger there. And move that down. Okay, so I want to do one more thing for this flower. Now I want to actually create a filled area. So I'm going to go back to my shapes. I'm going to go into the circle. And this time I'm going to choose a circle with both a fill and an outline. So I'm going to click on that. And of course we end up with this giant size to start with. It maximizes the size. So we'll go down until we can shrink that. And this is going to actually create an embroidery design within that area. And all the other spaces, I'm basically just going to have an outline. But I want to define that flower with a little bit of texture. So move that into position. I'm going to increase the size of that a little bit. And I am going to want to do the same thing for all 4 flowers in this image. I am ready now to add my stipple fill. I've got it centered in the screen, and I need to be able to see those blue lines that I drew with my wash away marker. Remember, I drew those lines so that I would have a very defined line to see between the panel piece and the borders that I've sewn next to it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to touch the leaf to increase the depth of that image. And the next thing I'm going to need to do is draw a shape to match this rectangle. And I'm doing that to literally create a boundary so that my stipple fill stitches don't spill outside of it. If I clicked on the bucket tool right now and used the fill option, I'll just show you real quick what would happen. It would fill any of those areas all the way outside. And you can't see it because it's so light there, but you can see it filled all the way across that area. If I minimize this, you'll see that it filled the whole hoop. I don't want to fill the whole hoop. I only want to fill that rectangular area. So let's undo, use our trusty undo button, and bring my image back up. Again, I want to be able to position that so I can clearly see those blue lines. That looks good. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the machine that I want to create a line, but I don't want to stitch it. So I'm going to go to my line properties tool here, and I'm going to choose the selection that literally turns off the stitch. You'll see why I did that when I finish this up. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on my shape tool. I'm going to start with a line and a square, and then I will turn that into a rectangle by resizing it. I'm going to shrink the size widthwise, and then I will also shrink the size, or increase the size rather, lengthwise. And I'm going to have to shift this up in order to get that centered where I need it to go. We've got lots of room for adjustments there. And again, I want to err on the side of inside those blue lines rather than having fallen on the outside, because I don't want my stipple fill to cross over where those seams are. And I'm going to bump this over until I get that rectangle pretty well centered within those blue lines. Let's turn this up one more notch, see if that made a difference. Not enough to really count. All right, I am pretty close there. Let me go just a little bit wider and a little bit taller. And if you look real close, you can see that I'm not quite perfectly parallel and perpendicular to the panel that's actually stitched. And maybe the panel isn't perfectly parallel or perpendicular either, but I want to create that fill area so it matches as closely as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my rotation keys, and I've got very fine increments that I can use to just tilt that a little bit. So you can see that more closely matches that now. And I may go ahead and go back to my size key and just bump that out just a little bit. As long as I'm within those blue lines, I am happy. All right, I am ready now to fill this. I'm going to fill it with just standard fill stitches for a minute because I think you're going to be able to see those more clearly. Let's turn that image down, and you can see that I have filled all of the area outside of the shapes that I've drawn and all of the area inside of the rectangle that I've drawn, and I have set that so that it will not stitch. All right, and at this point I am ready now to change this to a stipple fill. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my fill tool, click on the stipple. I'm going to change the color here to a light brown. I will in fact stitch that stipple fill with a monofilament thread to make it even more kind of float and fall into that pattern without really showing up much. But for sake of showing you here, I want you to be able to see it. So my bucket tool is selected. When I click on that, it will now fill that whole area with stipple stitches. I am done at this point designing on this screen. So I'm going to go ahead and click memory and save that to my SD card. Now it's time to generate the stitches. I'll go ahead and click next. And at this point I have more changes that I could make. I want to change the stipple fill to be more appropriate for the technique. So I'll first select run pitch and just tell you what the run pitch is essentially your stitch length. I'm going to leave that at the default. I find for almost all of the stipple stitching that I do, no matter what other changes I make, I'm pretty happy with that default stitch length. However, the next selection allows me to change the spacing, and I want to decrease that spacing by a large amount because I want this to be a micro stipple fill, meaning I want those stitches to be very, very close together. Not quite to the minimum size. I did a test and found that I was happy with a setting of 1. So I'm going to click OK on that. And then once that generates, I'm ready for my final setting. My final setting is distance, and distance sets how far out the stipple fill is from any of the line areas that you have set as a boundary or any of those shapes that I've drawn as a boundary. And I want to go all the way down to 0 with that because I want my stipple fill to fall as closely as possible to those shapes and lines that I've drawn. Once that's generated, we are ready to preview this, and you can see the changes that I've made. That is very, very good. Exactly what I wanted. I am ready now. Again, I can save this into memory so that I could come back to this stage if I wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and do that just for the fun of it. And now we're ready to proceed to embroidery. I'm going to touch set. It's going to ask me if it's okay to convert it and okay to go to the embroidery edit screen. Okay. We are now ready to stitch our design. You can see my entire pattern here. Let's go ahead again and preview that, and you can see exactly how that's going to stitch. In the next step, I'm going to be stitching this out on the embroidery machine and showing you how I did the trapunto. Now that I'm in embroidery mode, I have options for further editing, but I'm set with that design. I'm just going to go ahead and preview that so that I can make sure I have everything where I need it to be. And I'm going to go ahead and just do another scan of my image. Just to make sure everything lines up where I want it to be. With the edit features here that I have, I can tweak the size a little bit and change colors if I wanted to. I would say that looks just about where I want it to be. Maybe I might go a little bit further out on the size. And let's go ahead and use the same hand tool to see. Yeah, that makes me a little happier because it's a little bit closer to that blue line, and I've got a very realistic, accurate image of what I have under the needle in the hoop, and that's because I scanned it with the camera-like function. All right, I'm now ready to proceed to embroidery, and we are going to embroider this design in the next step. What I'd like you to see is the order of stitching. If I use my plus/minus key, I can scroll through the stitches. My stipple fill is first, and then I have my flower centers and my outline for my flowers, and then finally I have the eyes and the belly area. That's the area that I want to create a trapunto effect. I'll just go ahead and bring my sample back over here, and hopefully you can see that little bit of extra puff there where the belly is and where the eyes are. So I'm going to achieve that by using a additional batting underneath. I can either use a thicker, little fluffier batting, about 3/8 of an inch thick, or I can use multiple layers of the same cotton batting that I have, which is this one here. So that's what I'm going to use. I want to stitch out that area first so that I can take care of trimming that goes around that, and you're going to see me do that step right here. So what that means is I'm going to need to skip all the way to the end, and then once that's finished, I'll go back to the beginning. And you may be wondering, let's go back to the original order here, why it creates this order. Well, when you're working in My Design Center, basically the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So whatever you created last on the My Design Center screen will show up as the first design element in your sequence. Whatever you created first will show up last. I want to go ahead again and fast forward and skip forward basically to doing the outline only. All right, I'm going to stop for a minute here and get this fabric placed underneath the hoop so that I have 2 additional layers to the one that I have in there. I can cut an oversized piece and trim it later, but I really only need this in the area of the eyes and the belly. All right, I have slipped my hoop off. I'm going to turn it upside down. And again, I'm going to use an oversized piece, but I'm just going to layer that underneath there. Bigger is better because if it slips a little bit on me, I'll have enough extra there. I could use some temporary adhesive spray to keep that in place, but I'm just going to carefully get that back onto the machine. I'm going into set mode. You can see that on page 8 I've got various settings for embroidery options, and one setting that I do use often is changing the speed. We'll talk about that a little bit when I get to do the stippling, but for most normal fill, 800 is about my top speed. I could go faster, but that's pretty much the standard that I leave it on. Embroidery tension, my machine is perfectly tuned. I leave that alone. I don't touch that setting. Embroidery foot height, though, is something that I will change. Note that the highlighted number is the default number. If I go to a lower number, my foot is going to be a little bit closer to the fabric layers when it's embroidering. So if I'm embroidering on something a little thinner, I will often change this setting. In fact, I prefer 0.40 for a lot of my normal garment weight fabrics when I'm embroidering. However, when I'm doing something thicker, I like to go on the opposite end. So some of this comes from experience, but I know from what I did previously that I liked an embroidery foot set at about 1 for this. And you can tell when you're actually embroidering if this needs to be adjusted at all. If your foot is pushing on the fabric, you want to set the foot so that it's higher. If you have a large gap in the area between your foot and your fabric, you'd want to go in and set that lower. So we're going to stick with this number today and then click OK. I'm going to switch back over to the stitching area so that you can see the stitching of this part. I've lowered my presser foot and I am stitching the outline for the eye and the belly. And again, if you notice, my foot is just resting nicely on that fabric, not too high up, not too far down. Once I've stitched both eyes and the belly, I'm going to stop the machine, remove the hoop, and use a pair of curved tip sharp scissors to trim the excess batting away. Again, the outlines that I created here were primarily not used as embellishment accents, but for my area where I wanted to create the trapunto effect. So you're seeing the trapunto technique right now. Alright, and of course my machine thinks the design is done because that was the last part. I'm going to pull this out, flip this over, and now I'm going to go ahead, get this into position so that you can see it. And I'm just going to trim away this excess batting. I don't have to trim really close. We're not creating applique. We just want that area to have a little bit of a puff factor, which is what I'm calling the trapunto effect. So you can see what I'm doing. If you wanted to use applique scissors for this, you certainly could. I'm going to go ahead and stop, and I'll be back when I have this all trimmed. All right, I have trimmed away my excess batting. You can see the areas there. Keep in mind when you do this, you want to put your hoop on a flat surface, and you want to take care that you do not disturb any of the fabric that is in your hoop, because then you will distort the area where your design is going to stitch. So be very aware of that and be very careful. Again, you don't have to be too neat. You don't have to be too careful. You just want to get the bulk out of that area. And if you feel more comfortable cutting through one layer at a time, cut one layer and then cut your second layer. I'm going to flip this over and get this back on the machine and thread it up with my monofilament thread for my stipple. Make sure you check your manufacturer's recommendations for the thread if they recommend a different needle than what would be standard. And then I've also taken care to thread my needle manually instead of using the automatic needle threader as per the instructions in my Brother manual. Next thing I want to do is simply advance to the first stitch in the design, send my needle down, send my needle up, give a little tug, and pull my bobbin thread to the top. I like to do that whenever I'm doing stipple stitching, and especially when I'm doing it with monofilament thread, to make sure that my stitches catch on those first few stitches. I'm going to go ahead and lower the presser foot and press green for go. I'll hold that for just the first few stitches, stop, and then use my scissors to trim close to that tail. I have done one additional thing. I've decreased my tension from the normal 4 down to the number 3. Monofilament thread is very thin and very tight, and it can be just a little bit harder on the tension. In fact, another little tip for you, I'm going to go ahead and go into my set screen, and I had showed you before changing the speed. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and decrease this down to a speed of 400, which is pretty low. But that's going to just, again, allow for that thread to be a little bit more comfortable as it's stitching. And we'll go ahead and stitch all the stipping, and I will come back to you when I'm done. All right, my stippling is done, and I'm ready to stitch out the last few colors here. I'm going to go ahead and leave that size 14 needle in. If you wanted to, you could switch back to your standard embroidery needle, but I'm going to be doing such a small amount of stitching, it's not going to matter. Go ahead and thread this with my yellow thread. And I'm good to go. We've got 4 yellow centers to stitch. That'll take a couple minutes, and then we'll be doing the outline. All right, I am back in embroidery mode and ready to add some embellishment to the borders. If you take another peek at my original little sample here, I used some decorative stitches built into the embroidery mode of the machine and added leaves here with what I call shadow stitching. So let me show you that technique. And I'm going to go ahead and go into embroidery. I'm going to select built-in decorative stitches from the menu, and you're going to find these stitches are on a variety of Brother machines. This feature goes back a ways, so check your machine to see what you have available. Naturally, if you can't do this with embroidery mode, you could add rows of decorative stitching in the sewing side of your machine. So simple as that, you just take it out of the hoop and do some marking and stitch some rows on those borders if you want to dress them up with some decorative stitches. So let's go ahead and select from the menu. I'm looking for that leaf stitch, which is stitch number 169, right there. I'm going to go ahead and touch set, and I want to be able to see exactly where these borders are going to be positioned. So I'm going to start right off by touching my scan button and scan the image of my fabric in the hoop. You saw me do this in my design center for the purpose of designing. Now I'm going to use it for the purpose of placement. So there we go. I can see exactly where those edges are. And I can also see the allowable area that I have for embroidery for this 10 5/8 inch square hoop. Now I'm going to work with my design right in the center for a minute here. I'm going to go to the edit mode, and I'm going to a feature that's called repeat pattern function. And really what it is a wonderful way for creating borders. And I'm going to make a border out of this leaf and place it both at the top and on the sides. In order to maximize this design, I'm going to go ahead and touch the size key first. And I'm going to resize this to the maximum amount allowable. I'm going to do that by selecting first the key that allows for stitch recalculation. And if you look at the warning message there, you see it's telling me that it needs to reset the position to its original size, angle, and position before it will allow me to do this. So that's why I didn't bother to move this design off to the side, because I knew it would just make me go right back to the center again anyway. We'll move it in just a minute. Again, by selecting this key and activating this key, tell it okay, we're good to go. I'm going to be able to resize this design larger than the allowable 20% that you're usually doing without stitch recalculation. And it will add stitches when I increase, and it would subtract stitches if I were to decrease this. Works very, very well. I would suggest if you're doing something that is very important and the exact way it turns out, that you may want to stitch a sample first, because there are occasions where the recalculation will change the formation of some of the stitches and turn them into just a little bit different type of stitch in order to recalculate properly. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm going to use this border function here to add another leaf right below it. I've got the ability to add both vertically or horizontally. I'm going to add one horizontally, and then I'm going to go ahead and center that and move that over and see if that's where I want it to be. I'm going to see if I can fit in another one here by bumping that up to the edge, and by going ahead and adding one at the bottom. And then I'm going to use this feature to just ease those together, and it will just shorten up the distance between those leaves. I want to see if I can get that to fit without too much distortion. That looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to line that up so that it is just about on the edge of my blue line, which I know is the edge of my panel. Looks good. And in order to create the shadow stitching, I'm going to switch now to horizontal mode, and I'm going to select a copy horizontally right next to the first. Now I want these to be much closer together for the technique, so I'm going to do another feature here. I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart. Once I select this key, it'll bring up my cutting tool, and I can cut right down the middle there, and then I can go use my select key, select that one on the left, and move it over so that it's I'm going to actually put it right on top of my original. I'm just going to keep moving that until it's on top. When I see a clear line, I know that they'll be right one on top of another. There we go. And of course I can always use my magnification key to zoom in on that and make sure that I am exactly where I want to be. Let's see if we move that one more. If it's, yeah, that's actually right on target, because the two look like one now. I'm going to use my panning tool and move that over. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead now and move it to the left. Well, why did I put one on top of the other first? I do that so that I can be consistent on both sides, and that way I can count the number of movements that I push it over to the left, and when I create the same border on the opposite side of the panel, I can use the exact same count. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm going to do 10. It's really up to you what you do. It doesn't matter, but you just want that little bit of an offset so that you can stitch this out with the first motif in a lighter color and the second one in a darker color, creating just that slight little shadow effect. All right, now there's a couple ways that I can get this same effect over on this side. I'm going to do it just a really quick way by touching add and going through the same process that I did before for selecting that leaf. Like I said, there are other ways to do it, but this one's just kind of quick and easy because I'm following the exact same path. So I'm going to again select edit, select size, choose recalculation, say OK, and increase that size to the maximum. And once I reach that size, I'm going to be able to go in and use that same border function to create what I want to do here. However, I want to mirror image this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on mirror image and flip that so that I'll have a mirror image copy from the other side. We'll go ahead now and move this. Again, I want that right next to my border line. So I'm going to increase the magnification here so I can make sure that I move that over just like I did for the other one. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and select my other one just to see how close I am. Just right about on the edge of that blue line, and I'm just right about on the edge of the blue line with this one as well. I will tell you that when you use a more free-form design instead of a straight design that has a very defined straight orientation to it, it's a little bit more forgiving. I'm going to click OK, go back to a smaller size so that you can see what I'm doing here, and back to the border key, and I'm going to add now to the top and to the bottom. It really doesn't matter how you add. You can push your design up and then add one at the bottom and another one at the bottom, or you can work from the center out. I generally work from the center out because it gives me a little bit more ability to make these adjustments. And we're going to move that down. And what I want to do is I want to match the size. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click on this to click on my select tool and select that and see what was my actual size for this. The height was 10.41. So I want to get that same height for this, and I'm going to do that by spacing that out until I get that same number. Then once I do that, I will be able to move that into position. Oops, a little bit too much there. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and move that one up. Again, I'm just going to double check myself to see where I'm at there. That looks good. I'm going to now change to horizontal and select that second copy. I'm going to cut it apart just the way I did before. And then I'm going to select it and move it over. Use the same process. When those two become clear, then I know that they are one right on top of another. And how many counts did I do on that other side? I believe I did 8. Let me check my position on this one. And my position there. All right, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to go back to selecting another leaf. And this time, once I select that, I will just make that smaller so that I can make that fit. find my number 169 here. And there it is. All right, I want to add a couple more leaves up here to kind of balance this out. So I'm going to go back and select that same stitch pattern, number 169. And keep in mind, I am working with an updated Luminaire, which makes this identical to the Luminaire 2. Now, I'm going to go into edit this time. I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. I'm going to move that up to the top. I'm going to go ahead and move that over before I add my second copy. Slide that over. Don't have room for the big leaves like I did previously, but I will have room for 2 of these. Go to border function, go to horizontal, add a leaf there. But once again, I want to change the orientation of that, so I'm going to cut those apart. And then I'm going to go ahead and select the one on the left, click OK, and I'm going to mirror image that. Perfect. Now, I want to create the same pattern at the bottom edge here, on this bottom border area that I have at the top. So I'm going to use another feature I have, which is copy and paste, and I will copy that design. I'll go ahead and move that down. And I could use the ability to just click and drag right on the screen, but by moving this with the arrow keys, I'm going to get the same positioning that I have up at the top. So I know that's going to be in the exact same center spot. Click OK. And now I want to go ahead and rotate this one. And mirror image it. Select the next one. Scroll through that until I get the piece that I want. I'm going to go ahead and copy that and move that one down into place. There's a variety of ways that you could do this. I could repeat the border function. I could bring in a new motif, but whatever way works. Main thing is I want to have 2 that look alike. So again, I'm going to mirror image that and rotate it 90 degrees and 90 degrees again. All right, so those are connected the same down below as they are at the top. Let's just check the positioning on this. I'm going to zoom in. I think I'm going to want to move that over a little bit. Again, remember we're using a very forgiving piece here because it has some swirls and twirls in it, but I know I'm going to want to move these so they're a little bit more lined up. So let me select that and move. The beauty of this is what you see is what you stitch, so you can continue to modify your designs and get them exactly where you want them before you sew. That looks pretty good. Okay, I am happy with that. So I'm going to give you just another preview of this so that you can see the whole thing. And let's take a look at this in preview mode. And that's going to stitch out really, really pretty. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close and proceed to embroidery, and I will stitch out these leaves with my pretty green threads. Now, when I get to the actual embroidery page, I can go on layout, and naturally I didn't change any of the colors of this, but I'm going to choose the threads that I want to stitch here. I can go ahead And if I wanted to just stitch those all out in one color, I could click this key and just have, you know, those leaves have that double effect without the shadowing. But I don't want to do that. I want to create that shadowy for these two side panels. So I'm going to leave my stitching so that it does stop for every color part. However, when I do border designs like this, there's a lot of stopping and starting because there's, you know, a fair amount of small pieces. So I like to go in and turn off my jump stitch trim. So ending color trim and turning off jump stitch trim will both cause the machine to just carry the tail threads forward. I like to turn off both of these when I'm doing the border stitching like this, and I will take care that I watch to see that my tails don't get in the way, but it creates a little bit less knots on the back of the machine because it's not having to cut every time it ties off. And especially if you have fabric that is a little bit more light in color like I have here, and if I use a darker green thread, I don't want those tails to show. So I'm fine with manually cutting those in this particular case. I have completed my border stitching, and I've trimmed my minimal jump threads with my curved tip scissors. I really didn't have but just a few jump threads there, so that wasn't a problem. And I'm pretty well ready to wrap up this part, but I did want to show you my shadow stitching. I probably could have used a little bit more contrast here. I stitched the first row with this color embroidery thread and then went searching for a contrast, and no matter how many spools of thread you have, you're always seemingly not finding exactly the one you want. So this was my next spool. It had a little bit of contrast, but if you look at the two, there's not a lot. Camera doesn't show quite the true color, but there's a little bit of difference here, but not a tremendous amount. So if I had it to do all over again, I would have stitched one a little bit lighter and one a little bit darker to give just a little bit more contrast there. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I have completed embroidering my borders and my little accent here at the top and bottom of the panel. And I'd just like to point out a couple things. First of all, I was able to very easily trim my jump threads. I had minimal jump threads, clipped them out with these curved tip scissors. Looks like I missed maybe one here, but that's a good indication to show you that I just have a couple little jump threads to take care of in order to clean that up. So not a problem there. But I will restate that when you do this technique, if you turn off the cutting feature and the jump thread feature, please make sure that you watch your machine to make sure that your embroidery foot doesn't get caught in any of those little loops that form when the stitch jumps from one position to another. I also wanted to point out the fact that when you choose to do this technique, if you try out this shadow stitching technique, make sure that you opt for embroidery designs or decorative stitches, like I used in this case, that are very open, because you're going to have overlap in certain areas, and you don't want to have overlap of heavy stitches on top of other heavy stitches. So just keep that in mind. Keep it into more of a free-form, open style stitch, and you will have good results for that. Thanks for watching.